Mohammed Shehada. He is the Chief of Communications for the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor and joins us now live from Copenhagen. Mohammed, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. When we look at the nature of this conflict in terms of the danger that's posed to journalists, how unprecedented is this compared to other conflicts that you monitor around the world?
Well, in this decade, it's quite unprecedented. If you look at the record now in Gaza, Israel has killed almost 3 times more journalists within 10 months than in all 20 years of the US war on Vietnam. And even the Second World War, they have killed almost 3 times more than all 6 years of the Second World War. The reason behind these killings, it's not just arbitrary, it's not just collateral damage, it's literal systematic targeting of one journalist after the other. For example, Hamza Dahdouh or Ismail al-Ghul, who were targeted, and the IDF admitted that they went after them. The main reason for that, if you couple it with the Israeli blanket ban on the entry of any foreign journalists into Gaza, is to cover up atrocities of unimaginable scales. It's basic, integral part of a genocidal campaign, a war of extermination, because if you look at one of the main measures that the ICJ recommended or ordered Israel to implement was the preservation of evidence in Gaza and allowing fact-finding missions and independent investigators access to the enclave so that they can document the atrocities that are unfolding. Journalists in Gaza are basically, local journalists are acting as the last gatekeeper to preserve evidence, information, and to create network with witnesses and victims. So each one of them, when they are targeted, you bury a huge mountain of evidence that would be very, very difficult to re-establish the same context, the same testimonies, the same witnesses, even journalists themselves as some of the first people that approach sites of atrocities. You bury a huge amount of evidence. It's not just brutal killing and maiming. It's also, we see an established systematic Israeli campaign of defamation against these journalists, where basically every time, for example, CNN or New York Times or Washington Post, they contract with a journalist in Gaza, you would see these pro-Israeli lobbies and organizations go deep and deep and deep and dig as much dirt and defamation against them to get them fired immediately. And you see Israel basically one time after the other. For example, even the IDF spokesperson, Fichai Ader, he came out a few days ago to cast doubt and defame and demonize Anas al-Sharif, who was one of the main journalists that covered the atrocity at the school, Tabi'in school, where about 100 people were slaughtered and butchered and hacked into pieces. Literally, people had to put body parts in plastic bags. Each 70 kilos were considered a human because you no longer had any recognizable traces of the victims. So if you put all these pictures together, what you get is basically a systematic attempt to bury atrocities and to bury any traces of these atrocities in the long term.
And as you mentioned, international journalists have tried on a number of occasions and failed to gain access to Gaza. It does make balanced reporting incredibly difficult. But Israeli spokespeople have done many interviews with Western journalists, for example. Do you feel they have been sufficiently held to account?
Well, basically, mainstream media is complicit. They have blood on their hands when it comes to Gaza. Israel has been banning them from entering Gaza independently, but a lot of them entered Gaza embedded with IDF forces and troops on 3 conditions. Number 1, they need to go exactly where the IDF tells them and film exactly what the IDF tells them to film. And number 2, not speak to a single person in Gaza. So you saw journalists from CNN and Fox News, etc., that were at Al-Shifa hospital when Israel put it under siege and made a lot of ginormous critical claims that were later debunked. And not a single one of these journalists was allowed to speak to the Palestinian patients and refugees that were sheltering in the hospital. And the third condition is that they need to hand over all the material that they plan to publish to the IDF to review it before they publish it. The result of that is basic propaganda. The other thing is we see a huge downplaying of atrocities Whereas when it comes to anything that Israel claims, you see mainstream media playing along with it with a very polemic, emotive, insightful language, where everything the IDF says is taken as at face value and repeated to water down atrocities. And then a week or 2 weeks later, once that atrocity is out of everybody's minds, we learn that everything the IDF has said was complete fabrications. And it's been repeated over and over and over again. And you see mainstream media willing to play along with it. Hence the complicity in a genocidal campaign, in a war of extermination. You're now at a situation where people in Gaza, journalists in Gaza, see it as one of the most dangerous things they could do is to wear a press vest, because that renders them an immediate target.
Yeah, Mohammed, just on that subject of embedded journalists, I have also seen balanced reporting from other Western news organisations when they have gone with the IDF and seen what the IDF wants them to see. But they report that everyone understands that this is not both sides of the story. So there is some unbiased reporting despite the embedded journalists going in. Now, when journalists from Western organisations are offered the opportunity to even get into Gaza to see a small amount of even what the IDF want them to see, should they refuse that opportunity? Because surely some access and the ability to write what little you can see is better than no access.
Well, if it's under condition that they need to review all the material with the IDF beforehand.
Well, that's not been the case with some reporting that I have read and seen.
Of course, but it's been the case, for example, at Al-Shifa Hospital or the Rantisi Hospital. You were at a situation at the Rantisi Hospital where the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, pointed to a calendar in Arabic, the days of the week, and said, these are the names of terrorists. This is conclusive evidence terrorists were in the basement of the hospital. And CNN ran it without a single fact check and later had to remove it without even an apology. So this has been a problem. If they can go in with total freedom of reporting everything that they see, that is fine. But if they go in under the condition that the IDF needs to review the material and only show them what they want them to see, that's a problem. The other thing here is that every time humanitarian workers or journalists go into Gaza, that was a testimony of 6 soldiers in an Israeli newspaper plus 972. They said every time humanitarian workers and journalists would go into Gaza, the IDF would clear the roads of literally dozens and dozens of decomposing bodies that are being eaten by stray dogs and cats. And the way they would clear the road is lump up all the bodies and hide them with the rubble. That's literally the testimony of soldiers that were serving in Gaza. Okay. So lump up bodies with rubble and run over some of them with tanks. So even more atrocities. So there is the principle of do no harm that needs to be upheld. And there's also, as you said, the craving for a minimal amount of information as much as possible in this situation. So it's a more quandary.
Mohammed, we thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. Good to speak to you today.
Thank you.